Did you ever stop to wonder about those fairy tales? The ones with princesses locked in towers, forever waiting for a brave knight. What if everything you thought you knew about medieval damsels in distress was completely off the mark? Get ready to challenge what popular culture has told you about women from the 5th to the 15th centuries. Number 1, the powerful medieval woman. You have seen the movie scenes countless times. A noblewoman, frail and pale, is locked away in a tall stone tower, her only hope a shining knight who will rescue her from a grim fate. She sighs dramatically, perhaps gazes out a narrow window, her life a constant state of waiting for a hero. This image, plastered across screens and storybooks, paints medieval women as universally helpless, confined, and utterly dependent. It is a powerful picture etched deeply into our collective imagination, but it is largely a work of fiction. The truth about medieval women, especially those of noble birth, is far more complex, dynamic, and frankly much more impressive. They were not just passive pieces on a chessboard, they were often the players themselves, wielding significant power and influence in ways that would shock many today. Consider the role of queens and noblewomen. These were not mere decorative figures. When a king or lord went off to war, which happened frequently, who do you think was left in charge of the sprawling castle, the vast estates, and the multitude of servants and vassals? It was often the lady of the house. Women like Eleanor of Aquitaine stand as towering examples. Born in the early 12th century, Eleanor was not just a queen, she was a sovereign in her own right, inheriting one of the largest and wealthiest territories in France, the Duchy of Aquitaine. She became queen consort of France and later England, and her life was a whirlwind of political intrigue, artistic patronage, and even military campaigns. She led armies, influenced policy, and navigated the treacherous waters of European politics with cunning and determination. Her story is a testament to the fact that high-born women were expected to be capable administrators and powerful figures, not simply waiting for rescue. Her records from the era show Eleanor negotiating treaties, raising ransoms, and even imprisoning those who challenged her authority. She was a force to be reckoned with, shaping the political landscape of two powerful kingdoms for decades. Beyond the thrones and ducal seats, noblewomen frequently managed vast households that were essentially small economies. These households included not just their immediate family, but dozens, sometimes hundreds, of servants, craftsmen, and agricultural workers. A noblewoman was responsible for overseeing food production, managing finances, administering justice among her tenants, and ensuring the smooth operation of every aspect of estate life. This was not a passive role. It required sharp intelligence, strong organizational skills, and the ability to command respect and obedience. Medieval account books, such as those kept by Lady Isabella de Vesci in the late 13th century, detail her meticulous management of revenues, expenditures, and agricultural output across her various properties. These documents show women making significant financial decisions, investing in land, and even engaging in large-scale trade of their surplus goods. They were shrewd businesswomen, not cloistered wallflowers. Then there were the women of the church, particularly abbesses. These powerful figures ruled over vast monastic communities, which often owned extensive lands and had significant political and economic sway. An abbess was responsible for hundreds of nuns, monks, and lay servants. She administered justice, managed property, collected rents, and engaged in diplomatic relations with local lords and even kings. Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century German abbess, was not only a spiritual leader but also a renowned philosopher, composer, mystic, and physician. She corresponded with popes and emperors, offered political advice, and even went on preaching tours, something almost unheard of for a woman of her time. Her influence extended far beyond the walls of her abbey, challenging the notion of medieval women being confined and voiceless. The very existence of female-led monastic houses with considerable wealth and influence directly contradicts the idea of women being universally powerless. Even below the nobility and the highest echelons of the church, women were active participants in medieval society. Peasant women, who made up the vast majority of the population, were certainly not locked away. Their lives were filled with demanding labor, both inside and outside the home. They worked in the fields alongside men planting, harvesting, and tending livestock. They spun wool, wove cloth, prepared food, and cared for families. Their economic contributions were vital to the survival of their households and communities. Village records and local manor surveys frequently list women as landholders, renters, and even taxpayers, showing their active participation in the economic life of the village. They were not just wives and mothers, they were laborers, producers, and economic agents. In urban centers, women were found in almost every trade. The records from medieval guilds show women working as brewers, bakers, weavers, innkeepers, parchment makers, and even goldsmiths. In many guilds, women could inherit their husbands' businesses and continue to operate them, sometimes even taking on apprentices. The widow's privilege in many towns allowed women who had lost their husbands to maintain their businesses and even inherit property, granting them an economic independence often denied to married women. We see evidence of women running prosperous taverns, managing shops, and engaging in large-scale trade. They were essential to the bustling economies of medieval towns, far from any imagined tower. The Book of the City of Ladies, written by Christine de Pizan in the early 15th century, celebrates the achievements of women throughout history, highlighting their contributions in every field, from scholarship to warfare. Christine herself was a professional writer, earning her living through her pen, a stark contrast to the helpless image often portrayed. The myth of the perpetually distressed damsel waiting for a hero overlooks the incredible resilience, resourcefulness, and political acumen displayed by countless medieval women. They were regents, landowners, business owners, spiritual leaders, and vital contributors to their families and communities. The narrow window of a fictional tower does not do justice to the vastness of their lives. Number 2. The myth of universal chivalry. You might have seen the popular image a gallant knight, shining in armor, kneeling before a beautiful lady, pledging his undying devotion and protection. This scene often suggests that chivalry was a universal shield, wrapping all medieval women in a protective embrace, ensuring their safety and honor. This romanticized view, often painted in movies and novels, suggests that knights were always champions of women, upholding their dignity and defending them from all harm. This vision of chivalry, however, is far more complex and often less benevolent in reality than it appears in popular culture. Chivalry as a code of conduct was primarily designed by and for men, specifically knights, and its application to women was often conditional, self-serving, or even contradictory. Chivalry's core tenets revolved around military prowess, loyalty to one's lord, religious devotion, and honor among male peers. While it did encourage certain behaviors towards women, such as respect for noblewomen and the protection of the weak, these were often secondary to the martial aspects. The ideal knight was first and foremost a warrior, not necessarily a social reformer. The stories that shaped chivalric ideals, like the French epics known as chansons de geste, focused heavily on battlefield glory, feuds between lords, and the bonds between fighting men. Women in these tales often served as prizes, symbols, or catalysts for conflict, rather than autonomous individuals worthy of protection for their own sake. They were often the objects of chivalry, not necessarily its beneficiaries in a way that guaranteed universal safety. The concept of courtly love is often intertwined with chivalry, further complicating the narrative. This stylized form of admiration, popularized in medieval poetry, involved a knight's intense devotion to a highborn, often married lady. While this might seem protective, it was also often an idealized, unattainable love, performed through poetry and gestures rather than a practical safeguard for all women. The Lady of Courtly Love was a muse, a symbol of purity and inspiration, but rarely a real woman with agency and vulnerability. Furthermore, this form of love was confined almost exclusively to the aristocracy, and did not extend to the vast majority of women in medieval society, who were peasants or townspeople. For them, there was no shining knight pledging devotion. Their lives were far more concerned with survival and labor. In practice, the chivalric code often failed to protect women from real-world violence and exploitation. While a knight might be bound by honor not to harm a noble lady in specific contexts, this did not prevent widespread sexual violence, abduction, and forced marriages. Raids and sieges, common features of medieval warfare, often resulted in atrocities against civilian populations, including women, regardless of any idealized code. Records from various European regions indicate that rape and abduction were unfortunately common during times of conflict, and even in peacetime, women of lower social standing had little recourse against powerful men. The protection offered by chivalry was largely reserved for women of noble birth, and even then, it was often selective and dependent on the circumstances. A noblewoman might be protected by a knight from an outside threat, but she might still be subjected to coercion or violence from her own family or husband. Moreover, the emphasis on a knight's honor could sometimes lead to outcomes that were detrimental to women. If a woman's honor was seen as tied to the male relatives who were responsible for her, any perceived slight against her could be used as an excuse for men to engage in violent duels or wars, with the woman herself having no say in the matter. Her well-being became a pretext for male conflict, rather than a genuine concern for her autonomy or safety. In the stories of King Arthur, for example, Queen Guinevere's fate often hangs in the balance as a result of the knight's perceived duties and conflicts, with her own desires and agency often secondary. Even in the tournament, a hallmark of chivalric culture, women were primarily spectators, providing inspiration and emotional support for the competing knights. While their presence elevated the event, they were not participants and were still vulnerable to the potential chaos and violence that could erupt around such gatherings. The very act of a knight fighting for a lady's favor often reduced her to a symbol, an object to be won or honored, rather than an equal human being. The idea that chivalry universally protected women is a simplification that ignores the harsh realities of medieval society and the inherent biases within the chivalric code itself. While individual knights certainly could be honorable and protective, and the ideal of chivalry did provide a moral framework for some, it was far from a blanket guarantee of safety or respect for all women. So it was a complex system of ideals and practices, often contradictory, that served the interests of a warrior aristocracy. The dazzling armor and grand gestures often masked a reality where women, particularly those outside the nobility, were still vulnerable to violence, exploitation, and a lack of agency, even in a supposedly chivalrous age. Number 3. Debunking the helpless heiress. You have seen the movie. A beautiful young woman, a helpless heiress, is completely controlled by her male relatives. She cannot inherit property, has no say in her own life, and is nothing more than a pawn in a game of male power and politics. Her legal standing is non-existent, her voice silenced, her fate entirely dictated by fathers, brothers, or guardians. This enduring image suggests that medieval women, regardless of their social standing, possessed absolutely no legal rights or ability to assert themselves in the legal sphere. It is a compelling narrative fitting neatly into the damsel in distress trope, but it is deeply misleading. The truth is, medieval women possessed a surprising array of legal rights and played active roles in legal proceedings, often challenging and asserting their own interests. The legal landscape of medieval Europe was incredibly varied, not a monolithic system. Rights and customs differed significantly from one region to another, from one social class to another, and even over time within the same kingdom. While it is true that medieval legal systems generally favored men and patriarchy was a dominant force, women were not entirely excluded from the law. They could and did own property, inherit estates, run businesses, initiate lawsuits, and defend themselves in court. One of the most significant legal rights for women, especially noblewomen and wealthy townswomen, was the right to inherit property. While male primogeniture inheritance by the eldest son was common, especially for titles and major fiefs, daughters could and often did inherit land and other wealth, particularly in the absence of male heirs or through specific legal arrangements. A woman who inherited land might become a powerful landowner in her own right, controlling vast estates, collecting rents, and exercising feudal rights over tenants. Records from 12th century England show women like Isabella of Angoulême inheriting and managing substantial dower lands and properties. The concept of dower, which guaranteed a widow a portion of her deceased husband's estate, was a crucial legal protection, ensuring her economic security and often giving her considerable autonomy. A dower could include land, buildings, and revenues, making a widow a powerful economic force, sometimes even more independent than when she was married. And furthermore, medieval legal documents frequently show women appearing in court both as plaintiffs and defendants. They sued for debts, defended their property rights, sought justice for wrongs committed against them, and even participated in criminal proceedings. Records from medieval towns across England and France show women bringing cases before municipal courts, challenging contracts, disputing inheritances, and arguing for their rights in the marketplace. For instance, in the court rolls of medieval London, women appear as frequent litigants, asserting their rights in various commercial and personal disputes. They did not simply cower in the background, they engaged directly with the legal system to protect their interests. In urban centers, women often had greater legal autonomy, especially if they were involved in trade or crafts. Many towns operated under the legal principle of feme sole, which allowed married women to conduct business independently of their husbands. This meant they could enter into contracts, incur debts, and sue or be sued in their own name, a crucial right for running a successful enterprise. A woman might run a shop, manage an inn, or operate a craft workshop with her legal identity as a businesswoman recognized and protected by urban law. This provided a pathway to economic independence and legal agency that directly contradicts the image of a universally helpless woman. Even in marriage, while a woman's legal identity often merged with her husband's, a concept known as coverture in some legal systems, she still retained certain rights. Her dower rights were generally protected, and she might have had some say in the management of her dowry, the property she brought into the marriage. Moreover, ecclesiastical courts, which handled matters like marriage, divorce, and morality, offered women avenues to seek redress. Women could petition for separation or annulment, challenge abusive husbands, and bring cases related to promises of marriage. These courts, while operating under religious law, still provided a legal forum where women could articulate their grievances and seek remedies. Records from the Italian city-states show a remarkable degree of legal and economic freedom for women, especially noblewomen and merchants. They actively participated in commercial ventures, managed family fortunes, and often controlled their own dowries even after marriage. These women were not hidden away, but were visible figures in the economic and social life of their cities. The legal systems, while imperfect, allowed for significant female participation and assertion of rights. The notion of the medieval woman as a perpetually helpless heiress with no legal standing is a popular culture oversimplification. While life was undoubtedly challenging and often patriarchal, women possessed a variety of legal rights depending on their region, social class, and marital status. They actively engaged with the legal system, asserted their claims, and worked to protect their property and interests. The courts and legal documents of the time paint a picture of women who were far from passive and voiceless. Number 4, the truth about medieval love and marriage. You have seen the movie. A beautiful young woman is dragged against her will to the altar, forced to marry a cruel old lord for political gain or family wealth. Love is completely absent, a foreign concept in the cold, transactional world of medieval unions. The scene paints a picture of women as mere commodities, stripped of agency in matters of the heart, forever trapped in loveless, oppressive marriages. This widespread belief about medieval marriage is a persistent popular culture myth, suggesting that personal affection played no part whatsoever and that women had no say in their matrimonial fates. The truth is, while arranged marriages were indeed common, particularly among the elite, the reality was far more nuanced, often allowing for affection to develop, and sometimes even offering women a surprising amount of influence in the choice of their partner. It is undeniable that marriage, especially among the nobility, was often a strategic alliance. It was about consolidating land, forging political alliances, and securing dynastic futures. His daughters were often seen as valuable assets in these negotiations. However, this does not mean that love was entirely absent, or that women were completely powerless in the process. Parental consent was usually required for both parties, but canonical church law, which held significant sway over marriage, also emphasized the importance of mutual consent from the bride and groom themselves. A forced marriage, if it could be proven that either party truly did not consent, could be annulled by the church courts. This canonical requirement, though sometimes difficult to enforce, provided a crucial legal leverage for individuals who genuinely opposed a union. Evidence from medieval letters and personal documents reveals that affection, partnership, and even deep love could and often did blossom within arranged marriages. Noble couples frequently shared responsibilities in managing their estates, raising children, and navigating complex social landscapes. Letters between spouses, though often formal, sometimes hint at genuine warmth and companionship. For instance, correspondence between Agnes Sorel and Charles VII of France in the 15th century, though an unconventional relationship, shows a deep emotional bond. More conventional examples from private letters of the gentry in England and France reveal couples sharing news, offering comfort, and expressing concern for each other's well-being. These were not always cold, functional partnerships. They were often dynamic relationships that evolved over time. Furthermore, women, particularly those of noble birth or from wealthy merchant families, often had a surprising amount of input, even if not direct choice, in their marriages. They were often consulted, and their preferences, especially concerning the character or reputation of a potential groom, might be considered. While outright refusal might be rare, a noblewoman could use various tactics, including passive resistance or appealing to family members, to influence the outcome. The prospect of an unhappy daughter, or one who might later cause trouble, was often a deterrent for parents. Though negotiations could be complex, involving families for years, and a woman's consent or enthusiastic agreement could simplify matters significantly. The concept of courtly love, while idealized and often not leading to marriage, also played a role in shaping medieval views of affection and companionship within marriage. Although courtly love often involved an illicit affair or unrequited devotion, it fostered the idea of a deep emotional connection and intellectual respect between men and women, which could spill over into expectations within marriage. In literary works from the period, like Chrétien de Troyes' Arthurian romances, often explored the complexities of love, loyalty, and commitment within or outside of marriage, reflecting a society that was grappling with these very ideas. proceedings. For common people, marriage was often less about grand strategy and more about practical necessity and local community ties. While parents often played a role, young people frequently had more direct contact and even developed relationships before marriage. New village records and local customs suggest that young men and women often met at festivals, markets, and communal gatherings, and personal attraction was certainly a factor. The economic considerations were paramount, but affection could still be a component. The idea of a couple forming a household, working together, and raising children often fostered a strong bond of partnership and affection that went beyond mere economic arrangement. Finally, the Church's influence on marriage cannot be overstated. By the 12th century, the Church increasingly emphasized marriage as a sacrament, a union requiring mutual consent and indissoluble bonds. While it upheld patriarchal structures, it also offered women certain protections and avenues for recourse, as mentioned in the previous chapter. The focus on consent, even if imperfectly applied, was a significant shift that empowered individuals, including women, to reject unions that were truly forced. So, while medieval marriage was not a free-for-all of romantic love, as we often define it today, it was also not a universally bleak landscape of forced unions and loveless lives. Affection, partnership, and a surprising degree of female agency were often present, making the popular culture myth of the completely helpless bride a vast oversimplification. Number 5. Myth-busting dress codes. You have seen the movie. Every medieval woman, from the queen to the peasant, is depicted in elaborate sweeping gowns, often with tight bodices and restrictive corsetry, her hair perfectly braided and adorned. The visual suggests that medieval women were solely concerned with their appearance, that their lives revolved around looking beautiful, and that their clothing was uniformly impractical and limiting. This image, deeply ingrained in popular culture, presents a narrow and often inaccurate view of medieval female attire and its purpose. The truth is, medieval clothing was incredibly diverse, largely dictated by social class, region, and practical necessity, and it was far from universally restrictive. The most important factor in medieval clothing was social status. A noblewoman's attire was indeed elaborate and designed to reflect her wealth and position. She would wear gowns made of fine wool, silk, or even brocade, often imported and dyed with expensive pigments. Her clothing would be layered, perhaps with an underdress, a long outer gown, and sometimes a surcoat or mantle. Adornments, like embroidery, furs, and jewels, would signify her status. However, these garments, while elegant, were not always as constricting as popular culture often portrays. Medieval corsetry, as we understand it, did not exist in the same way as in later centuries. While some garments might have been tailored to fit snugly, they were generally designed to drape and flow, allowing for movement suitable for managing a household, riding horses, or walking through castle halls. The focus was on displaying wealth and adherence to current fashion trends, which varied significantly over the centuries and across different regions of Europe. For instance, the flowing, often loose-fitting styles of the early medieval period gradually gave way to more tailored forms by the 14th and 15th centuries, but they were still functional for daily life. Now, consider the vast majority of medieval women, the peasants, the farmers, the craftswomen, the merchants, and the domestic servants. Their lives were filled with physical labor, and their clothing reflected this practical reality. A peasant woman would wear simple, durable garments made of coarse, undyed wool or linen. Her basic outfit would consist of a tunic or kirtle, perhaps an apron, and a head covering to protect her hair from dirt and sun. These clothes were designed for ease of movement, allowing her to work in the fields, manage livestock, spin yarn, bake bread, or carry heavy loads. They were loose, comfortable, and built to withstand the rigors of daily toil. The idea of a peasant woman wearing a restrictive gown while milking cows or harvesting crops is simply absurd. It would have been impossible for her to perform her duties. Urban women involved in various trades also wore practical clothing. A weaver would need sleeves that did not get caught in her loom. A baker would require clothing that could withstand the heat of the oven and be easily cleaned. A merchant woman attending stalls in the market would wear practical dresses that allowed her to move freely, handle goods, and interact with customers. Surviving illuminated manuscripts and historical records often depict women in workshops or marketplaces wearing clothing that is functional, often with tucked-up skirts or aprons to keep them clean. Their clothing was a uniform for their labor, not just a display of beauty. Furthermore, medieval fashion was dynamic. Styles changed, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically, across the centuries. The flowing Anglo-Saxon tunics of the early medieval period looked nothing like the elaborate gowns of the Burgundian court in the late 15th century. Head coverings also varied from simple veils and wimples to more complex headdresses like the horned hennin, but all served a function, often as a sign of modesty or marital status, as well as protection from the elements. The popular culture myth of uniformly elaborate and restrictive medieval female attire overlooks the immense diversity of medieval society and the practical demands of daily life for most women. While noblewomen might have worn fine garments, their clothing was still generally designed to be functional for their lifestyle. For the vast majority of women, clothing was a matter of utility, comfort, and durability. The visual narrative of the perpetually corseted, elegantly helpless medieval damsel is a fantasy that ignores the vibrant, working lives of women across all social strata.